MSG. Now keep in mind that excitotoxins like these, they break the blood barrier, they enter to your brain at lightning speed, they stimulate it like a street drug or alcohol or barbiturates do, and they cause you to crave the food you're eating more. And they cause you to eat more even when you're not hungry. So the next time you find yourself, or maybe you've been really healthy and you've been eating really good for a couple of weeks, and then all of a sudden, you find yourself at a party or a get together, and maybe there's pizza there and chips and Coke, and you say, I've been good for a couple of weeks, I'll just have one piece. And then you just find yourself, it never turns into one piece, right? It turns into several pieces, and you just end up really kind of gorging yourself. Hey, we've all been there. Not just once, but more than likely many, many times, including myself. You got to ask yourself, why aren't you doing that with whole natural foods? Why aren't you just like irresistibly craving an apple, an orange, a banana, a fresh salad, broccoli? Well, one of the answers may be is that it doesn't contain excitotoxins in it. So think about that. Bottom line is that food labels can be very deceiving. This one right here is Cocoa Krispies, and they're claiming on here on the front of the box that this stuff that is really about 60% sugar and has nothing to do with real food, and does contain excitotoxins, by the way, if you look at the label, that it's going to improve your child's immunity by 25%. Now, what they're doing is this is a marketing ploy. They've come up with some kind of crazy study that really probably doesn't hold much water if it were really to be scrutinized, that this is somehow going to increase your child's immunity and help protect your child against, what's the hot topic right now, the swine flu. But you need to learn how to arm yourself and read labels correctly. So I'm going to give you a website and one other example of how food manufacturers are deceiving us. And this one's by Frosted Flakes. Okay, I made this one up. It's my bad attempt at humor on here. But the point is that you need to learn how to read labels on here. And there's a great free website called ebranda.com. It's got tons of helpful and useful information so that you can identify, how much sugar is in there, because food manufacturers don't just put the name sugar in there because they know in the ingredient section if they've got sugar there that most people are going to be turned away from it. And so they come up with all types of other forms and names that you and I don't recognize as sugar in it. I'd like to bring your attention now to a wonderful book called The End of Overeating by Dr. Kessler. Now, Dr. Kessler is currently a practicing physician, and he also served as a former FDA commissioner from 1990 to 97 for the United States. Now, Dr. Kessler in his practice, when he would see patients that were overweight, hypoglycemic, maybe even diabetic type 2, generally overweight, as a doctor, he wanted to try to help them out. So he would try his best to get these people to change their lifestyle, to eat better, to eat more whole foods, to stay away from the unprocessed foods. Much to his dismay, he could not get people to do this at the rate he would like. People would come in and describe that they're just so drawn and crave to the foods that they just can't stop eating. They couldn't possibly imagine giving up these foods that are literally destroying the quality of their lives, causing them to die early, and causing them many health benefits. And he couldn't find any acceptable explanations out there. So in his book, basically what he does is he uncovers the reasons why. It's very interesting. He goes to the top food manufacturers and top food engineers. Food is big business both on the shelves of our supermarket and in restaurants, and particularly chain restaurants, both fast food and non-fast food across the United States. They don't just introduce a dish into their menu all the way across the United States. They've got to make sure that consumers are going to fully enjoy the flavors, crave it, and come back for more. And the food engineers which he interviews describe the process. It's a matter of layering just the right amount of fat, sugar, and salt into foods, such that they find out that with humans, that when they get the right ratio of those three things, that it literally hijacks the brain and makes you want to eat more and crave more on here. In addition to that, they go on, and one of the engineers describes that one of the major goals is to get people to chew less. Now, if you're eating whole natural food, you need to chew about 25 to 30 times before you swallow. And they found that people will eat more food, thus buy more food, so their goal is to get people to chew 10 or less times. The ideal is 5 times before they swallow. So they add all kinds of chemicals to the food so when you initially bite into it, it might be crispy like a Dorito, but after you chew it 5 times, it just almost turns to mush. These are chemicals at work. In addition to that, it makes you eat more. It's got the salt, fat, and sugar in just the right ratio to hijack your brain. And in addition to that, they're of course adding excitotoxins on here. If you're not a reader, you're not quite sure that this would be a book or information that you would be interested in, I would encourage you to spend 15 minutes listening to an interview with Dr. Kessler in NPR. Just go to npr.org, type in David Kessler, and that will come up. So I encourage you to do your research on that. I want to now move your attention to sugars. Now, all the data that I'm going to share with you here is according to the USDA. In the 1900s, Americans consumed 4 pounds of sugar per year. Fast forward to today, and we consume an astounding 142 pounds per year. Now, you may be thinking, oh, sugar like white grain sugar. No, sugar comes in a lot of different forms. And let me share with you some of the areas of which we find sugars in, and therefore we consume 142 pounds per year per person on average. You're going to find sugars in processed foods, breads, whole wheat breads, pizza crust, hamburger buns, health crackers, cereals, food labeled low fat, because that's one way that they replace the flavor by removing the fat. Then they add sugar in there. Canned foods, frozen foods, bagels, right? Who thought that bagels were this healthy meal in the morning, right? Well, actually, they're laced with sugar on there. They're also highly processed. Peanut butter, right? Lots of sugar in there. Yogurt, of all places. That's how they make yogurt taste so good, is they add different types of sugar to it. Low-fat salad dressings, tons of sugar in there. Fruit juices, soda, and the obvious candies and cookies on here. And what is also astonishing about this is that the USDA is not counting in their data of 142 pounds any kind of corn-based sugars. And corn-based sugars are one of the largest sources of sugars in our diets that they put in these things. So it is estimated by experts that it is more like 170 and upwards pounds per year. Now, why is this important? I mean, you don't see people dying immediately by eating sugar or going for this high amount of sugar per year. Well, let's take a closer look at it. What happens when we eat sugars and refined processed foods like wheat, corn, and rice? Basically, anything that can get into our bloodstream very quickly and rapidly, which is the majority of the American diet today. Let's take a quick look at that. Step 1, you got a big old meal that you've just consumed. It's got a lot of refined wheat, corn, and sugars in it. Everything's just wholly processed. What happens is that is immediately going to stimulate the insulin release. When it stimulates the insulin release, because you've got all of the simple sugars now floating around in your bloodstream, your body has got to regulate that. It can't have too much in there. And your body can really only do 2 things with the extra or with the carbohydrates, the glucose that's in your bloodstreams. It can either burn it or it can store it. It can't just make it disappear. So those are the only 2 choices. When it's got too much, the insulin comes in and causes your body to draw the glucose, the excess glucose, out of your bloodstream and store it as fat. Step 2. High insulin levels suppress 2 very important hormones. So if you're eating, 2, 3, 4, 5 times a day, and you're eating food that's primarily processed and contains sugars in them, then you're having large spikes in your day of high insulin levels. Okay? And this is the majority of people out there. Look at the epidemic.